Thank you all for being here, and we're really excited that we have such a great turnout for this event today. It's always gratifying to know you're working on important issues and knowing that you're working on things that really mean a lot to the community, and then to see the community really turn out in force for an event like today. So thank you all for being here. Next slide, please. My name is Tim Tomier. I'm an Assistant City Manager for the City of Tucson, and it's my privilege to be here to welcome you and also be one of your hosts for today and our climate action event. You are here today because we need to hear from you. We need to understand what makes you nervous about climate change, what actions you think the city should take, and how do we as a community move forward to have a resilient climate future. So we'll be co-creating our climate action plan with you, not just today, but over the rest of this year 2022, so that we can be resilient together for our climate future. We want to envision a future Tucson that is thriving amid climate change. We take a lot of pride in how we live in the Sonoran Desert, and we embrace our environment, and we do minimal things to change it, and I think we've done better at that as we've gone forward. But we do a better job when we work together, when we listen to each other, and when we bring together great solutions that are right for Tucson. We want you to provide input on these key themes and be incorporated into our climate plan, Resilient Together. This is also a chance, and a much needed chance, to connect with others in your community that share these concerns. And so we hope you enjoy the workshop for today. And then finally, to divine our hopes and expectations and desired outcomes for Resilient Together. I will be introducing the mayor here in a moment, but I'll just take a moment to take you through the workshop. We'll have some opening remarks from Mayor Romero. We'll have an overview and introductions, mostly provided by our consultant team guiding us through this process. And then we will have quite a bit of time to work together at your tables and around the room on our workshop, which will be hosted and conducted by Living Streets Alliance. And then we'll close things out and we'll get you out of here at 11:30. Quick housekeeping, as we need to do, as we are back in person again. If you need to use the restrooms, there are restrooms out in the main foyer to the west. There's also some down the hall if you need that. In the case of an emergency, if we need to exit the space, there are exits to the west and to the south. And we ask that you would assemble in parking lot A, which is the parking lot to the west, so that we can make sure everybody's out safe. And if you need assistance with any of the written or audio material, we have folks at the tables that can help you with that. And if you need Spanish interpretation, please raise your hand, and Juliana is here to help with that. We have headsets, and she'll be doing simultaneous Spanish interpretation. With that, I would like to also acknowledge a few folks in the room before we come to the mayor. Please welcome Council Member Kevin Dahl is here today, and thank you. And Katie Bolger and other members of his staff are here. So, gotcha. We have Antonio from Ward 1 here today. Thank you for being here. And if I missed anybody else, my boss. Sorry, there he is. City Manager Mike Ortega is here today. And the captain of our Los Reales Sustainability Campus is here, Carlos De La Torre, the director of EGSD. And if I did miss anybody, I'm sure I'll hear about it, but that's okay. So with that, I would like to, it's my honor to welcome our mayor and our climate mayor, Regina Romero, for our welcome.
A big hand to our Assistant City Manager, Tim Tomier, who takes the marching orders from the vision and policy decisions of mayor and council, works with our city manager and puts them to work, and has done an incredible job. Are you still new? No longer new, huh? No, I was gonna say new assistant city manager, but he's been longer than 6 months, so no longer new. Many, many years, the head of our Tucson Water Department, which by the way, is nationally recognized because of the conservation measures and policy decisions that have been made both by mayor and council and directors like Tim Timier. So wonderful addition to the city manager's office. Muy buenos días, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Estoy muy contenta de estar con ustedes. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning. And you are too quiet this morning. You have to get your coffee, eat your bagels, and be loud today because we are celebrating with you this incredible accomplishment of having such an amazing turnout for our first community engagement strategy this morning. So muchas felicidades, congratulations you all for getting up and coming to give us your opinion. So a round of applause for you all and everyone that helped make this happen. The incredibly accomplished staff of Borough Hopfold are here, our partners in putting this strategic plan together. It is more than a strategic plan, it is an action plan. This climate action plan is a living document that will be put to work by not just mayor and council and City of Tucson staff, but by our community. So I'm so happy to see all of your faces this morning. I would personally like to thank my community climate and sustainability advisor, Fatima Luna, who is leading all of the efforts from the mayor's office when it comes to environmental issues, water issues, climate and sustainability policy at the mayor's office. So big round of, get up Fatima, so that everyone knows who you are. And of course, our city manager that usually says, Mayor, what you and the council decide in terms of policy, those are my marching orders, and so he really is the person that leads the city and puts our vision to work along with Tim and others in his office. Thank you, Mr. Manager, for coming along with us and making all of this happen. And of course, my colleagues on the council that, I put ideas and my policy agenda on the table, and it's supported and voted on by my colleagues on the council, so Councilmember Dahl and Representative Antonio, who's representing the Vice Mayor's office. Really appreciate all the work that you and your staffs do to make all of this happen. Today is an important day because we're taking another important step towards creating a climate resilient Tucson. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to honor the tribal nations who have stewarded this land from time immemorial, and acknowledging that we are standing on ancestral homelands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the multi-millennial presence of the Pascua Yaqui tribe in the city of Tucson. As the original caretakers of this land and holders of traditional knowledge, we have much to learn from them as we prepare for climate change and how to adapt to rising heat. Climate change is a threat, not just to our environment, but to our public health, our economy, and our way of life. Tucson is one of the fastest warming cities in the country, and we are already feeling the effects of a warming planet. Extreme heat, wildfires, and prolonged droughts are detrimental to our people and to our economy, but they are especially felt by Black, Indigenous, and Brown communities, as well as children, elders, and the low income. That is why in 2020, my colleagues and I on the council declared a climate emergency and committed to carbon neutrality by 2030. But we are also taking action in the city of Tucson. Over the past 2 years, we have advanced climate action through multiple efforts. We have institutionalized the Tucson Million Trees Initiative, embedded in the work of the city of Tucson. We have planted or distributed over 45,000 trees through that program, and I have pushed around people to contribute to our Tucson Million Trees Initiative in partnership with Tucson Clean and Beautiful, over $500,000 raised for the Tucson Million Trees Initiative. And yes, this is something to celebrate, and this is with the help of our private partners. And I'm not going to start naming them all because I know I'm going to miss some, but Tucson Electric Power, Southwest Gas, so many others. Mr. Car Wash just announced their $150,000 contribution to the Tucson Million Trees Initiative. And we will continue with the help of private partners fundraising to plant our million trees by 2030. We also planted water through our Storm to Shade program by diverting water from the streets to create green spaces and water our million trees. We developed an Eevee Readiness roadmap to accelerate the electrification of our fleets and advance EV infrastructure and adaptation. Tucson became the first public transit company in Arizona to have fully electric buses for fixed routes. And we are currently adding another 5 buses, electric buses, to Suntran, which at the end of the day, hopefully at the end of this year, we will have 10 electric buses in our electric fleet. We changed the residential code to require all new residential buildings to be EV ready, and we are going through a similar process for new commercial, retail, and multifamily buildings. We embarked on a zero waste by 2050 path and are exploring ways to decrease waste production and divert waste. We changed the name of our campus from Los Reales Landfill to Los Reales Sustainability Campus because we are seeing a new way of taking a look at our waste. Our waste should be a resource. And on that campus, there is so much innovation happening right now as we speak. We continue to increase solar energy in our facilities, and now 25% of the city of Tucson's government energy is renewable energy. We continue to lead on water stewardship, and thanks to the decades of water conservation ethic by Tucson Water customers and City of Tucson residents, the city has over 5 years' worth of potable supply and groundwater storage locally. Finally, Mayor and Council allocated $9.6 million of American Rescue Plan dollars over 3 years for the implementation of climate resilience strategies, which is a great start to fund some of the outcomes of the Climate Action Plan. Although these are important steps to increase our climate resiliency, we still have much work ahead of us. That's why you're all here. But I am optimistic, and I know that with your help, the City of Tucson, Mayor and Council are going to move to the sustainable, thriving future that we all want and deserve. So I am optimistic because I see you all here. I see the environmental community, the business community, and so many different stakeholders here. I see you caring about our collective future. I see you eager to share your knowledge, perspectives, and lived experiences with a changing climate. When it comes to climate and environmental justice, we all have a part to play. Your part, your voice, your granito de arena matter. You matter. Your experience matters. Thank you for helping us to create a collective vision for a resilient, equitable Tucson. Thank you all so much for coming today. And with that, it is my pleasure to present to you our new Climate Action Plan logo. We can only make Tucson a resilient city if we work together. The power is in our unity, and there is power in community. Thank you all so much. Have a productive and wonderful day. And please remember that this is the first of many community engagement conversations that will help us put together our climate action plan. Muchísimas gracias and have a wonderful, productive day.
I'd like to introduce Associate Principal Chris Ree. He is the lead champion for our consultant team that'll be working with us throughout the year, and he's going to take you through some information to get you going on your workshop. So please welcome Chris Ree with Borough Happold.
All right, thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for coming out today. I'm so excited for this turnout and that we're all here to talk about climate action. Just to introduce myself, Chris Ree. I work at Borough Happold, which is an engineering and strategic planning firm. We focus on sustainability and climate change action planning with cities and regions across the United States. We are joined here. Oh, I should also acknowledge my colleagues from Borough Happold, if you folks want to sort of wave and say hello. And we're very excited to be here for this workshop. We're not in it alone. We also have on our team the Living Streets Alliance. Staff want to raise their hand? And then we also have a couple of additional team members. We have an economics consulting firm called AutoCase, which will help us evaluate the benefits and costs of climate measures and ensure that they are implementable and fundable. As well as the Drockman Institute at the University of Arizona, College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture. One thing that we considered very carefully when comprising our team was really thinking about who we wanted to bring to the table for this conversation around climate action planning. And I want to acknowledge that being in this room here today on a Tuesday morning is not the easiest thing for everyone. I'm fortunate myself to be paid to be here. But when we think about the folks who are most affected by climate change, the frontline communities, they tend to be population groups like youth, older adults, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, outdoor workers, immigrants. And so as we were thinking about how can we bring these folks to the table and go bring engagement to these groups who are most affected, not just making them come to us, we deliberately partnered with several community-based organizations, which you can see here on the screen. So we are working with Paisanos Unidos, the Arizona Youth Climate, Youth Climate Coalition, the font is very tiny, Local First, the Southside Workers Center, the International Indian Treaty Council, and the San Javier Co-op. And so we'll be continuing this conversation alongside all of them as well. Let's go to the next slide. So here we are. Resilient Together is the name that we've chosen for this plan, which you heard from the mayor not long ago. Let's go to the next slide. And this is serving as the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. We are working on schedule to complete this effort by the end of this calendar year. This is, just for background, the outcome of the Climate Emergency Declaration from the Mayor and Council, which also pointed to a few objectives. So in addition to establishing this plan, the Emergency Declaration called for carbon neutrality in city operations by 2030, a just and equitable transition as we think about moving to a renewables-based future, and a green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic with high road jobs, thinking about living wages and benefits. Okay, so in these conversations, we do use different terminology to talk about the different aspects of climate change. I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed by this slide, because the important thing is that we are here to talk about what climate change means for Tucson and what it means for you. But some of the ways that we do refer to it, we talk about mitigation activities. So how can we reduce our contributions to greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to global climate change? So we're thinking about fossil fuel usage in our vehicles, in our homes, and elsewhere. Climate adaptation, we're thinking about the actions to adjust to actual or expected climate change impacts. So how are we coping with heat? How are we coping with drought? And then finally, climate resilience is a bit of a broader term, and this is an outcome that we're really looking for. And it's asking the question, what can we do so that we can not only survive from climate threats, but also thrive in the face of them? And how can we bring our communities together to do that? You see a few examples of what these activities look like in the diagram, but I'm going to, because it's so tiny, I'm going to save that for my colleague who's going to follow up with a few examples. Also, we are very deliberate about thinking about what social equity means in climate change. Sorry, is this any better? All right. So we're thinking very deliberately about what it means to include equity in climate change conversations. And we break this down into 4 component parts. One is procedural equity. So that is asking the question that I referred to earlier. How do we bring folks to the table, the decision-making table? Distributional. If we're coming up with climate measures, if we're thinking about rainwater harvesting or solar electricity, where are those benefits landing? And where are the burdens landing of other environmental policies? Structural equity, we have to acknowledge that we're not starting all from the same place, that we have a legacy in Tucson, in Arizona, and in this country of inequities that have been very deliberate at times, that have dictated where people were allowed to live, or and so we have disparate outcomes. And then finally, transgenerational equity is really thinking about what can we do today that will preserve the needs of future generations to meet their own needs in a sustainable manner. I also want to acknowledge that even though this is the first large workshop that we're convening for this planning effort, we're not starting from ground zero. You heard from the mayor from a lot of the work that's happening already. I'm not going to read these all off from the screen, but I will say that if you do find yourself with a little bit of downtime, do visit our friends at the One Water 2100 table over there as one of our related efforts. And what's important here is that we think about what are the intersections with climate change. So we can't have a conversation about climate change without talking about housing, about economic development. And similarly, we shouldn't be having a conversation about housing and economic development without talking about climate change. So we really want to see how all of these efforts are interlinked. And from here, I'll give it off, give the stage to my colleague Louis Spanias, who's going to talk through some of what we've been observing so far.
Thank you, Chris. Can everyone hear me okay? Sounds good? Okay. So my name is Louis Spanias. I'm a senior consultant with the city's team at Borough-Happold. I work directly with Chris, and I'm serving as the consultant side project manager for this effort. I'm an Arizona native myself, albeit from Tempe, not from Tucson, so a little bit of a fish out of water, but at the same time, this still very much feels like home, and this is very much a passion project for me, as someone who not only cares about climate change, but calls Arizona home. And many of the things that you are all experiencing here in Tucson, we also feel up in Tempe and Phoenix as well. So thank you for having us, and thank you for being here. So we want to sort of put things into perspective with respect to some of the concepts that Chris just referred to. So we talk about climate change mitigation. We're really thinking about greenhouse gas emissions, right? The emissions that come from the resources we use, the fuels we use, the energy that we use to live and work and play. And what you see here on the slide is sort of a representation of emissions across both citywide operations and the community at large. And what you'll notice is that there's a couple of things that stand out, and of course for those of you who perhaps dabble a little bit more in the climate change space, these numbers aren't exactly surprising, right? So about 2/3 of the city's entire emissions portfolio comes from stationary energy. So that's, again, sort of the fuel and energy we use to power our buildings, our infrastructure. It's the energy that brings the water into your home. It's the energy that allows you to have air conditioning and cooling and heating as the weather changes. Also a big segment of emissions are transportation. So the fuel that goes into our cars, goes into our buses, It goes into everything that we use to get around and to move around. Now, of course, there are other pieces of this portfolio, but we just wanted to highlight those things because it's not just sort of a map of what we're doing. And of course, this is from 2019, so these are pre-pandemic figures, but they also showcase a bit of opportunity. So where can we think about some of the actions to reduce, at least from an emissions perspective, our impact? Let's see if the slides move from here. Great. But we're not just thinking about emissions, and emissions for many of us aren't exactly tangible, right? We know what they are, we know they're there, but you don't really see them. You don't really feel them, per se, at least not on a direct basis. What we feel are the impacts of those emissions. So part of our work is understanding what those impacts are from a climate change lens, and many of the hazards that you see here on the right are things that we all have lived and experienced and will continue to live and experience in increasingly changing and extreme ways as the climate changes. So heat is a big one. Many of us understand just how hot it is outside and how nice it is to be here inside. We understand the wildfire situation here in Arizona. For those of us who are from California, we know that all too well too. Flooding, wind, precipitation, drought being a huge issue. We are in the worst drought that Arizona has ever seen on record. So we want to better understand how these impacts are going to play out as they are playing out right now. And more importantly, we need to better understand how they impact you, how they impact the communities of Tucson. We need to understand as well who are going to be the most vulnerable. Many of us can get by day-to-day with some of these impacts, but there are many who cannot, and it will become increasingly more challenging for them to do so. So part of our work is really getting to that understanding so that we can plan for them as well as for everybody. So, just want to give you a bit of a perspective on sort of where things stand. This is a map of Tucson today. This is really, the map really says 1971 through 2000, but for intents and purposes, this is sort of where we are. This is a map of annual average max temperature. So this is not like the maximum temperature of a given year. This is sort of the annual high temperature across a given year. So in this period, we're talking about somewhere in like the low to mid 80s, really across the city of Tucson, which is outlined there in black. You can see sort of the mountainous areas, the recreational areas on the outside. And you'll notice that those are a bit cooler, understandably, given that they're more mountainous, perhaps if there's more vegetation out that way. But you'll see that it's kind of warm, but not necessarily unbearable. And this is perhaps kind of for many of us who've grown up here in Tucson or in Arizona, a little more familiar. But if we think about what happens if we do absolutely nothing, and if we think about what would happen in sort of a high emission scenario, so not just doing nothing, but continuing to perhaps even grow in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, it's going to get hot. It's going to get very hot. By mid-century, we're looking at least mid-90s as an annual average max temperature. So if you think about it, across the year, the average would be in the mid-90s. And then as you look towards the late century, again, assuming that nothing happens, assuming that we really go the worst way with this, it becomes even more unbearable. So this is just one example, right? This is just heat, but we're not here talking about all the other hazards where this also gets complicated and kind of uncertain and scary. But what we want to emphasize is that we are not doing nothing. That's a high emission scenario that is avoidable, it is preventable, and we can make it impossible. So we want to highlight first really quickly, of course we've spoken to some of these today already, some of the things that are happening in Tucson. I want to specifically highlight some of the initiatives from the city, including the Million Trees initiative, so thinking about shading and heat mitigation, the Eevee Readiness Roadmap, thinking about how we move around in a decarbonized way. We want to think about members of the community who are doing excellent work to improve things for the community and improve food security, community gardens here being the listed example, but of course there are many in this room. And of course the mayor spoke to the tribal nations who are the original and current stewards of this land. We have much to learn from them too. There's knowledge there that they have in terms of the resources, the land, that we do not have, or are at least starting to come to understand. So there are things, there are knowledges, there are truths that we can take and learn from and use to improve our situation and to improve our future. And finally, before I hop off and hand this back to Chris, I'll just say that there are other things we can do and that we are doing to mitigate climate change now and in the future, There's just a few examples here. I know it's sort of very broad, very high level. Some of it's very technical, but some of these things are the approaches that we'll be looking at very closely as we think about both mitigating emissions, adapting to climate change, and ultimately becoming a resilient Tucson. So with that, I'm going to vacate the stage and hand it back to my colleague, Chris.
All right, thank you, Louis. So today is just the start of this engagement process, and we'll be continuing the conversation over the next several months. We'll be having another workshop with a draft plan down the road, and conducting community dialogues and pop-up events in collaboration with those community-based organizations that you saw earlier. And this is really an effort, again, to take the conversation to the communities that are most affected. Oh, go back just a second. We also have online the Climate Action Hub, and so that's a great place to keep tabs on what is currently happening, and we'll be posting on there, for instance, the outcomes of today's workshops and the different elements of the plan as it comes together. Keep track. We also have your email addresses today, so unless you'd like to opt out, we'll also keep in touch via email as well as this evolves. And also want to offer you a direct line of communication to our climate action planning team. So feel free, you can get in touch with Climate Action Plan at tucsonaz.gov, and that's we can certainly continue the conversation that way as well. Finally, on the right-hand side, you heard today from Tim, myself, and Louis. Fatima also is a core member of our team, and Jeremiah, who just walked in through the door. So these are the folks. Definitely feel free to flag us down today, and we'll also be monitoring the email address to continue the conversation. From here, we're going to stop talking so much, and I'm going to invite Kate Saunders from LSA to lead us into the next portion of the day.